talent or it's active talent.
That's a soft skill that really gets undersold in the hiring process.
How to manage in the virtual environment.
You get a diverse cultured group of people. It's a win-win for everybody.
More conversion from candidate leads.
What does that look like in this new virtual world?
Welcome, everyone. It is Thursday, noon Eastern time, and you know what that means. My Apple Watch to tell me it's time to breathe because I am excited for Talent Experience Live. I, of course, am your host, Devin Foster, and this is your weekly look into the hot topics in HR, interviews with leaders in the industry, as well as hot new HR tech. Today, we are talking with I think a couple industry leaders here, but we are covering everything you need to know about confessions of a hiring manager, and we'll dive a little bit into talent acquisition, recruitment, maybe even some talent management as well. But it is tradition around these parts. I love to know where everyone is from. So if you see the comment section on YouTube or LinkedIn, wherever you may be, feel free to drop that in there. I see a couple people chiming in already. Also, while you're at that part of your page, don't forget to share this to your network. Like, subscribe to content. Phenom is putting out fantastic content on a daily basis, blog posts, videos, one-pagers, case studies, everything that you need to know and more. We did just launch a Kuehne+Nagel case study, so definitely check that out at the Phenom Resources tab. And as always, if you aren't able to catch today's full episode, it is available on the Phenom blog, as well as a little website everyone may have heard of called YouTube. Looks like a couple people joining us right now. Tracy from Maryland is joining us. Welcome. Rich from Florida. Welcome. I mentioned at the top of the program, today we are talking about confessions of a hiring manager. Of course, with great hiring power comes great responsibility, and it's up to both the recruiter or manager to pull out all of the stops when searching for the right talent. Tom Tate chimes in and says, mystery guest today, might as well sell the 7s and 8s of my seat because I am on the edge of it. Tom, that is fantastic. It is a mystery guest today, and we are excited to find out who it is as Jen chimes in as well. But before we jump into that, it is tradition around these parts to do an icebreaker question to encourage a little bit of interaction from the audience. As always, you can chime in with questions and comments when we bring our guests on. But the first question is, what is the weirdest question you've ever been asked when interviewing for a job? I know mine right off the bat was someone once asked me what my favorite color was. My favorite color is black. I don't know if that gave them some insight into my personality or who I am as a professional. I thought it was super strange. No explanation was given to me, but some of my other favorite ones are, if you were an animal, what kind of animal would you be? What does that have to do with this job? You get the message. So definitely chime in with those. And while you're answering that, I also want to mention that we do have an email here. It is txl@phenompeople.com. So if you have any questions that pop into your head after the show, you can always fire away with them over to that email address. As I mentioned before, I am Devin Foster, and today's topic is all about hiring manager confessions. So as we bring on our mystery guest, let's run the clip. Very descriptive clip there. Hiring manager with the name JD in the bottom right-hand corner. Before we get started, I have to ask, are you actually a hiring manager?
Devin, thank you. I appreciate being on the program. As you know, we agreed that my voice would be disguised. So I want to start and confirm that my voice is in fact being disguised.
Yes, it is disguised. We have no idea who you are. But I did want to ask you, obviously, becoming a hiring manager, at some point you have to interview, right? So I'm going to make a little tweak on my icebreaker question here for you. And have you ever had any awkward interview moments as a candidate, maybe for this role as a hiring manager?
Well, thank you. I think it's interesting. I had a lot of awkward moments, but I'll take you back to my very first interview out of school. I walk into a startup's office. I get brought back down hallways. I'm really impressed. I just graduated a month ago. And I start talking to this individual, older individual. And I get, I don't know, about halfway through the process in the interview. And I said, "Hey, are you new here too?" Because he had nothing in his office. It was just beige walls all over the place. So I figured, well, they're hiring like crazy. This is a hot startup. He must be new. No, he was one of the co-founders of the company, practically one of the co-founders of the company. He just simply looked at me and said, "No, I'm not new." So it was an awkward moment, to say the least.
I think they call that a minimalist in society. If only he had some paintings or some whatever you have that is covered up behind you to maybe bring a little bit of life to that particular office that you were in that day. But you skated around my first question. So are you in fact a hiring manager? And if so, how long have you been hiring people? Are you even remotely qualified to be on as an expert today?
Well, I don't know if I'm qualified to be an expert. That I can't determine that. But I will tell you, I am in fact a hiring manager. And I've been a manager and a hiring manager for about 20 years now.
20 years. All right. I'll since I don't know who you are, I'll have to take your word for it. What type of workers do you typically hire for?
So I've hired a lot of knowledge workers. So I've been in environments where it's tech startups, human resource startups. So it's been more or less on the startup side of the house. I have worked for a company that was over 400,000 employees at one point. So large company, but all of the hiring has been around knowledge workers. I've never been in a position to hire frontline workers.
I feel like this is almost like a game of guess who as we fire through these questions. But before we jump into that, I did see a comment that came through around you asking if somebody was new here that was almost one of the co-founders of an organization. Carrie Payne says, "I would rather have ham for hands or some sunscreen coming out of my armpits," because that sounds like a very embarrassing situation. So we asked what type of workers you hire for. Do you currently also manage individuals? And if so, about how many do you manage?
So I really do have the privilege to run a marketing team, and I manage upwards of 25, 26 people currently.
Okay. All right. The good numbers there. 20 years of hiring, 26 people you're managing right now. I think we're starting to whittle this down a little bit. What's the most recent position that you hired for?
Oh man, we've hired a lot recently. A couple that stick out for me is we hired a web designer recently.
Okay. All right. Web designer, always important. You mentioned marketing. All right. One last question before we get into the meat and potatoes of this. What's your name and what company do you work for? All right. I guess we may never know. So the next thing that I think is super important when we talk about hiring managers is obviously they have to have a close-knit relationship with a lot of recruiters. How would you describe your relationship with recruiters?
Okay. So we talked, yeah, I said you cannot ask me the company I work for, and you've asked that. And now you're getting more personal. I've got to tell you, I have nothing against recruiters. I've just never personally dated or had relationships with any of them.
Not really what I was asking. I was more so asking is when hiring individuals, how do you communicate with them? Would you say that is good or maybe not? Oh,
okay. Sorry about that. Just from the recording, just remove that piece. But I have as a hiring manager, I think I have a great relationship with recruiters. I have a high level of respect. And I think I would not have been able to hire 90% of the employees that I have today without recruiters.
All right, that's good. Well, I, being in this work from home scenario, have done a tremendous amount of watching daytime television, whether it be Jerry Springer or Maury. So, boy, do we have a surprise for you. We have a lot of recruiters that typically watch and follow TXL. So, to make this extra special today, we are going to bring on an actual real life recruiter to help pull out some of the deep down confessions. So, with that, we will welcome on Jen, the recruiter. Jen, welcome to the program. It's nice to have you back. I know you're a friend of the show. How's your day going?
My day's good.
Awesome. Jen, this is our hiring manager who has answered some questions. We do believe he is a hiring manager, but has given us no more information. So I will hand the floor over to you to ask him some of those nitty-gritty questions that every recruiter wants to ask a hiring manager.
Awesome. He does look familiar. I don't know. I feel like maybe we've met before. No, never.
No. Jen, it's good to meet you. I'm honored to be in the program that Phenom is hosting today. Thank you.
I see a lot of teal there. Does that color mean anything that I should know?
I'm not sure. I don't understand what you're talking about.
Okay. And the mask? No, none of that. Okay.
No, it's a funny story. I got this mask at the #1 talent experience conference in the world. It's amazing. It was
okay.
It was good.
Got it. So it doesn't mean anything though, personally. It's just a mask. Got it. Okay. So I have some questions for you. One question I just have is when we ask you as a recruiter to write a job description, are you actually doing that yourself, or are you gathering from somewhere else?
Oh God, no. I would not be spending the time writing a job description. What I do is I say, okay, what is the role? Do we have a previous job description already? And I usually ask the recruiter, and sometimes we do have one already. Other times it's like, okay, now I have to go get a job description together. What a pain this is. Open up Google, do a Google search, look at several, start copying and pasting from the best ones I've seen, and then using that as a base template to craft what we're more looking for. But what I will share as a hiring manager is the role we're looking for. If it's a specific attitude or it requires a specific demeanor, that's hard to get from anyone else's template, right? That's hard to get from it. Like I get the skill requirements or like the experience or job requirements from templates, but the actual description of what the person's responsible for and doing, a lot of that I will write because it's personalized to what I do know and I'm more comfortable with.
Okay. Yeah, I had a marketing manager once that took that liberty to write job descriptions himself. You may know him, but and I wouldn't let him do that because he added some of his own personality to it that I didn't know if everybody would respond to, but I can't imagine who that might be. So.
Jen, that sounds like it's a bit dangerous from a recruiting approach to allow that.
Yes. So good to know. So in terms of the jobs, when you're starting a job, and one thing I always wonder is like, oftentimes I'll ask, what's important to you? What are you looking for? And the hiring manager doesn't know what they're looking for. How do you not know what you're looking for in terms of a candidate for one of your positions?
How do I know what I'm looking for?
How do
I not know what I'm looking for? How's this? Is this good? It's easier to talk on a live session with less of a mask on. Okay. So how do I not know what I'm looking for? That's the question. So you're saying you talk to hiring managers and they don't know. They don't know right what they're looking for?
Right.
I think that's tough. When there's gaps and you're trying to fill, you're trying to add people to a team, you have an idea what you may be looking for. So as a hiring manager, I have an idea of what I may be looking for. But until I start actually speaking with candidates and talking to, say, 3, 4, 5, 6 candidates, what I had thought in my head we were looking for likely changed or was confirmed. And as it's changing, that helps a hiring manager develop a better or higher confidence in what they're actually seeking and what type of person is actually needed for the hire.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. Okay. So in terms of your requirements for the job, sometimes I see degree requirements. I obviously know that sometimes they're required to just do a job, but why in some cases marketing would somebody need a master's in marketing, for example? How would that make them more successful in the job?
So, education is important, and it's important to a lot of people, right? But when you're talking about degrees, I actually, as a hiring manager, I actually don't care. This is the truth. I don't care that someone has a degree or does not have a degree. It's not something I look for. I talk to them about their experience. I talk to them about where they want to go. I don't ask a recruiter. I've never in my life asked a recruiter to go find the best candidate who also, asterisk, has a degree or has a degree from a specific university or school or high school or vocational program. None of those have ever been a requirement for myself. Now, I have to context this. There's industries where degrees may in fact be very important to the job criterion success. I'm only speaking to you about the workers in the field that I'm in. And I think that's really important because it's not a one size fits all thing here. And so in this case, I'd say for me personally, degree and education come way later on compared to experience in the person in the conversation.
See, that's why I like working with people like you. I know I never met you, but that's why I like working with people like you. But yes, I understand. Obviously, certain jobs, it's more important than others. Great. Okay. So in terms of candidates, right? A lot of times I'll get a feedback after an interview that we're not going to move forward. The person's not the right fit, right? With just that as the answer. So what skills did they not have is what we're looking for. Why, and that's something that can be frustrating for us. So, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
My thoughts are, there's a lot of times as a hiring manager where you talk to many candidates and you like certain pieces and elements from one candidate. You like different elements as pieces from the other candidate. And quite frankly, a lot of times I personally find those differences are not always a specific one single skill. There's a lot of skills, at least in our trade in marketing that I hire for, there's a lot of skills that I think they can learn. You can learn that skill. If we don't have a role that requires absolute knowledge of a specific marketing system or skill set, then I feel like the best candidate is a little more well-rounded, but showing the ability to, I have no doubt, I'm getting the confidence from them that they will in fact be able to pick up and learn that skill or run with something. And that to me is more important. But as it relates to a candidate not having a specific skill and then being exited from the interview process, well, that happens if it's a core component of what that role absolutely is needed for. Or another scenario as a hiring manager is if I need a plug and play person, I need in fact to validate that the experience they have is filling the exact gap I need right now. And we do not have time. We don't have 9 months for someone to learn that. So now I have to choose the person who does in fact become plug and play over the candidate that I really think has the potential, but the timing of that candidate joining the company is just off a little bit. Right? It's just off a little bit. And sometimes that's the difference between having a skill and not having a skill.
Yeah. I think as a recruiter, what we're just looking for is not just that detail, right? If somebody's not the right fit, why? Can we get some more details on why they're not so that we can improve our process? So that you don't have.
Yeah. So I think, the challenges I've had with recruiters in the past is it feels like, well, why didn't you just tell me that in the beginning? Like if you knew these weren't the right types of candidates and you knew you required that skill, why didn't you just tell me from the beginning and I would have recruited for that?
Well, it's an ongoing process, obviously.
That's how I take it.
Yeah.
Jen, that's how I take it. The reality is, as a hiring manager, I didn't even realize that skill set was so important until I started talking with them.
Understood.
That's the reality.
Yeah. So the next question kind of surrounds urgency, right? As hiring managers always want to make hires fast for the most part. So if you want to hire as soon as possible, why don't you, as a hiring manager, why don't hiring managers make time on their calendar to actually interview these candidates?
Jen, this is a trick question. Hiring managers are perfect, and we always take the time we need to do interviews and interact with the recruiting team. So I'm not sure on this one.
Okay, then we'll move right along. I happen to know some hiring managers that do not do that, but I'm glad to hear that you do.
Okay. You're pushing me. I could tell in your voice, and I could tell you really want an answer for the audience. So
I want an answer.
Right. Sometimes as hiring managers, we just get all excited that we have open headcount or that finally we can hire for a specific position, and we move quick, and we don't set the time needed aside to do what's necessary to get the hire on. And we need to do a better job of that, of hiring managers and even working with the recruiters and get into some kind of habit, right? We know roughly how many candidates the recruiter is going to help the hiring manager look at, right? Now, we don't know how many more it will take, but you pretty much know the initial rush that's going to happen. And it's a shame. We do have to, I even personally have to do a better job because I have not always carved that time out either. If it's an urgency for me and I'm asking the recruiter to make it an urgency for them, then I in fact have to carve the time out and make those interviews easy and make them happen and give that more real-time feedback. I think you're right there. As an industry and hiring managers and recruiters, I think we can do a better job at that. I think in the future, we probably have better tools as hiring managers to make these things much, much easier and much quicker and in real time.
Yes. This is very therapeutic. I feel like we're getting places here. Okay. Same kind of question. If the job search is so urgent, then why are you taking so long to get back to me about the profiles that I sent or the resumes I sent for that matter?
Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but as a hiring manager, I am busy. I have things to do, Jen. Okay. I'm not sure if recruiters understand that hiring managers, actually work for a living and we have a day job, right?
You don't have time for silly things like putting glue all over your room or anything like that.
I'd prefer to call it teal, but there's a reason I can't disclose. I can't disclose things.
Okay, fair enough.
But I think that the challenge of a lot of what the last question you asked in this one related to carving time out to hire properly as a hiring manager, giving feedback and providing feedback how quickly do you want feedback? Answer that question for me as a recruiter. How quickly do you want feedback?
As soon as possible.
Okay.
I think it's best to get the feedback as soon as possible while it's fresh in your mind, because there's been times where I've asked hiring managers for feedback and they're mixing up the candidates whose feedback they're providing to me because they spoke to 5 people this week and they have to go back at their notes. So obviously with, understanding that you have other things on your schedule, of course, and you can't just, give us feedback immediately. With that in mind, still as soon as possible. I think with the day of the interview, giving that feedback is great. But at least within a couple of days. When it's over a week, first of all, we haven't managed a great candidate experience because we haven't been able to get back to the candidate. I again also think that it can be fuzzy in your head because, like you said, you're busy, you're doing other things. It's hard to remember. So I think within a few days, but ideally the day of would be what I would like.
I think as a confession show, I will say that if I'm not able as a hiring manager to provide feedback in almost near real time and immediate, I in fact do screw up which candidates are whom. And I have a hard time then articulating what I loved and didn't love. Like I say, if I love the candidate, it's easy. But if it's a candidate who I'm really not sure about, but it's not an absolute no,
right?
That I have a hard time. And if I do 2 or 3 interviews in a day, it's even worse for me. So, you know, I understand from a recruiter perspective, you'd like near real-time feedback. And I think as a hiring manager, it's also in my best interest to give that real-time type feedback. I just need to be able to do it in an easy way.
Right.
And you know, maybe technology solves that for us, as we mentioned another question. Maybe technology solves that for us moving forward. But that's where it would be much easier to provide that feedback. There's an easy real-time means to do it.
That sort of answered my next question, which was just, again, the same concept of why does it take so long to get the feedback after the interview? So the first part was more just after I've sent a profile, but this is more after the interview. So you've kind of already answered that unless you have anything you want to add.
No, I'm gonna cut both of you off real quick. Hold on, because I saw a comment in the chat from Jen Thomas, which was an interview question around why aren't you taking notes, right? She was a candidate, somebody asked her that. So I'll ask this question to our hiring manager. Do you take notes? And perhaps that would help with the process. Is there a process that you have to maybe sort out which candidates are who?
I actually feel like at one point in my interviewing, I may have asked a question similar to this to a candidate. But in this case, you're throwing me for a loop here, Devin. Thanks for the question. So I think in this example, you know, do I care if a candidate takes notes or not? I don't know. I certainly care about their reaction to answering the question of why aren't you taking notes, and seeing how they react and talk through that scenario. That's catching them off guard, which in our marketing industry, you need quick thinkers. You need people who are agile. So it's actually pretty genius to ask that question, right? And catch the candidate off guard and see how they react.
All right, that's fair. Jen, before you go, I have 2 questions that I think may relate to you in some way, shape, or form. So don't leave yet, but they are specifically for JD. JD, I know Glassdoor is essentially a place where candidates go to research. I have a question for you as a hiring manager. Do you feel responsible directly for any particular Glassdoor reviews?
Oh, I mean, should I feel responsible? That's HR's job to worry about Glassdoor reviews, right? No, this is actually, Jen, thank you for entertaining me there for a second. This is something that's actually really important, and I won't make a joke out of this. I will share with you. This is confessions. I'll share with you something I've done. I've already gotten off an interview, and Jen will like this. In real time, I reached out to the recruiter and I said, I'm sorry. I think I just caused us to have a negative review on Glassdoor. And I said that in real time. So like, what happened there? Did I feel responsible? Yes, I 100% felt responsible. Did I care? I absolutely cared. I apologized to our recruiter. And as a hiring manager, it's my responsibility to make sure every single candidate that's put in front of me is respected, is valued, is given a fair and open opportunity to showcase their skills, their knowledge, their experience, their possibility of how they can contribute to this company, the company, of course, that I would be working for at the time. And what then we as a company can help that candidate succeed and achieve in their life. And when an interview doesn't take into account all of that in the human side, then I don't think it's a great experience. And in this case, as a hiring manager, I didn't like how the interview went. Could I have changed the outcome? I don't know if I could have changed the outcome in that particular interview, but I certainly can recognize the mistakes that I made as a hiring manager during that interview and make sure I don't make them again in future interviews. So yes, I do feel personally responsible for, as a hiring manager, to Glassdoor reviews that are during an interview cycle. And I think it's every hiring manager's job to really give a great candidate experience, just like the world talks about HR teams and talent acquisition teams and recruiters need to provide an amazing candidate experience. The hiring manager is part of that, and they need to take responsibility. And I own up to it when I fail. And in this one particular case, I failed.
For those of you just joining us, this is Confessions from a Real Life Hiring Manager. I'm joined by said hiring manager and Jen. And hiring manager, I have one last question for you here. Talking about poor experiences, sometimes interview processes can drag on for a bit. And a lot of people have different concepts of what a long time may be. But my question specifically for you is, have you ever dragged a candidate along for more than a month's time? And how did that end as far as the relationship there?
Yeah, this is a really tricky question. I think probably if you go and look at what candidates really dislike from companies, like the dragging on process in multiple interviews is probably the biggest complaint, because it's the unknown of what's going to happen. And I have been in a situation where it took 3 months to get a hire. 3 months to get a hire. And part of the challenge was that I was changing what I felt the role should be, or the person should be in that role. And I was changing it based upon the candidates that I was meeting with. And I met with a lot of candidates during this one particular cycle. There was one candidate that we had done 3 interviews with. And one of those interviews was actually a project that we asked them to do and build. It was a graphics project. So this individual not only did 2 interviews, but then delivered a graphics project and talked us through the logic and the creative behind the project. You know, that individual, I'm sure, feels like the process was drawn out. And we did, in fact, draw that process out, because as a hiring manager, I wasn't finding the confidence of what I truly needed for the role. But at the same time, in this particular candidate, I found a person who I thought would be a very good fit for the company. Just not that particular role, but it was still a graphics type design role. And I couldn't let go. I had a hard time letting go of that. And, you know, and in the world of recruiters, I think you might call it a silver medalist, right? Like could be a silver medalist. In my world, that's not the right person for this job. But in the future, man, that would be a really great candidate to have. And you know, what I did with this candidate, I felt bad we drug it on. I personally reached out to them once I did feel confident in not hiring them. I reached out personally. I wrote a letter explaining why the process drug on, that they were not chosen. But I shared that why they weren't chosen, why they were, someone else chosen over them, and that I would seriously consider them for the next opening we had in this area of the business, not in the area that he did not get. And that person replied back and said, "Thank you. Really appreciate the experience." So I think it's not good to draw these things out. It does happen. But again, as a hiring manager, that's not a recruiter's job 100% to send that email. I don't think they can. It's not fair. It's not fair of them. But I think recruiters can encourage hiring managers to do more of that.
Yeah, I think that, as you know, those situations are going to happen where you have a candidate that you like, you have a candidate that you think could be a fit, but you just don't know where right now, or you don't have it right now. I think the way that we can just keep that candidate experience where we want it to be is communication, which can come from the recruiter, obviously, but ultimately I do think that it does have a special touch when it is coming directly from a hiring manager. And so, yes, as a recruiter, it's our job to also encourage that from a hiring manager if we think that that will add, value to the process and improve the experience. So you did good.
I feel like we've made some progress here in the recruiter and hiring manager relationship. Jen, I know that I'm sure you have an interview right now that we are running over, so we will let you go and hop
I have another
off.
show.
You have another show.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking the time today. Best of luck with that next show, and we'll put the link in the description, I'm sure, for that. But I do have more questions for the hiring manager. Starting off with one of the first questions that Jen had asked you, and it's around job descriptions. What are some of the biggest challenges? You mentioned hopping on the internet and copy pasting, cutting. What is so challenging about coming up with a comprehensive job description?
As a hiring manager, to come up with a comprehensive job description, one, there's a lot of time, right? Like, it takes time to write a really good job description, in my opinion. It's not something that's quick and easy. Second, I'm not the best writer personally, and I bet a lot of hiring managers are not either. So we're cobbling things together. Someone for this job that's existed for the last 10 years in marketing, someone must have written a really good job description. So they must have, right? Now, it's different if it's a unique role to the company. It doesn't really exist, has a unique skill set. Maybe it's a really hard to fill position, right? And in those cases, you really have to take the time. But look, if I'm looking for a product marketing manager, there's probably 1,000 job descriptions out there. Do I really need to create one from scratch? I think the responsibility we have as hiring managers is to make sure the candidate understands what you're actually looking for, regardless of which skill are they looking for that I have? No, it usually comes down to more than that. And that's what I choose as a hiring manager to spend my time on. Let me share with them candidly what the day-to-day of the role looks like. Let me share with them what's expected of them. What kind of person should they be? What type of energy should they have? Attitude should they have? Culture they should thrive in. It's not about the person only. The person needs to understand from the job description. They need to understand what type of environment they would be coming into. How would that environment benefit them? How would that environment challenge them? Interviews, job descriptions, everything is a two-way street. It's not just, I'm the company hiring. You have to listen to everything I say. No, this is a two-way thing in the interview process.
So the next question jumps in and it says, what are your thoughts? This is from Jen Thomas on a potential versus skills, which I think is a very important question. How do you decipher the two?
Yeah, so I love personally as a hiring manager, I love feeling and seeing the potential that candidates have and that they could bring to a company. I think that's one of the most exciting things you find and try to discover in the interview process. I think the lower you are in the hiring manager realm. So for example, I'm at the VP level. If one of my team members, say on the product marketing team, is hiring, they have to care more about skills. They have to care more about skills because that person is being brought on under them. And it is a big part about skills, being able to do the job. At my level, I'm looking for culture and fit, and I'm looking for that potential. So I think to answer Jen's question, depending on the hiring manager, if it's a direct report versus coming into the team, and you're a few levels above as a hiring manager, that depends on how in your thoughts to skills versus potential. But potential always needs to be there. Always needs to be there. Skills doesn't always need to be there.
That's fair. It reminds me of basketball. You can't teach height, right? You can't teach potential, but you can always add the skills. The next question that I have for you is, I know we talked a little bit about timing expectations with Jen, and you guys got a little bit of back and forth. I think we made some progress. How frequently would you say that that is an issue for hiring managers? Is it every single requisition that's open, or is it only one or two, maybe a year?
What about timing?
Yeah, timing.
What about timing?
Is it an issue every single position?
Like the urgency of getting a candidate?
The urgency, the understanding of how soon a position needs to be filled, whether it's tomorrow or whether it's a month from now. The timing, is that explaining those expectations, is that a challenge on every single role or just a few?
I hope Jen is still listening. I think she had to do some things. But what I love about this is it seems like hiring managers like myself are always saying, no, the timing is now. And then as Jen was talking about, like, okay, but if it's now, then how come you're not getting back to me? How come I don't have the job description yet? How come you're not making room in your schedule for interviews? So I think the answer is always, as hiring managers, we'd really love to fill everything immediate. And when we think of this need or we get that opening, time is important. But most hiring managers care about getting the best fit and the best individual for the role. And by the way, we're talking a lot about, the right role. The right role could be someone internal to your organization. It does not always have to be external. It doesn't have to be external candidates. It could be internal referrals. That's a big part of hiring as well. Several people from my marketing team over the years have come from internal referrals. And I will say, many times they make the best hires to the team.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that. I think that it is time for a new segment that I have on the show. Is something that we pulled from a little place called the World Wide Web. We found some posts on a number of different social platforms, including Reddit, which I think was the most frequent. And what I wanted to do was show you some of these posts and you as the hiring manager to react, maybe question something, provide some insight, but really overall, maybe some feedback on what may have happened in some of these situations where somebody said, you know what, I need to run and post this on the internet. Does that sound like a plan for you?
I like this game. Let's play.
All right, awesome. So here we are pulling it up right now. And this is the first one. It is jobs. Why should we hire you? Me, the candidate, nah. Why this position open and why people be quitting? So as a hiring manager, how would you react to something like this?
I love this question. I really love this question. As a hiring manager, I feel we should always be open about why this position is available. In most of my interviews, what I start out by saying is this role is made available because we are expanding, because the previous person in this role outgrew their role and became promoted, because the last candidate in this role didn't work out. Here's why they didn't work out. So I think it's actually a great way to start a conversation as a hiring manager, and it gives the candidate more insight in value about what you're looking for, why the position's there, why to get excited. So, to the person who posted this, maybe you phrase it differently, but it's a great question. I love it.
And just to clarify there, when you talk about workout, you're not talking about the gym. You're talking about it didn't work out for the role, correct?
I don't understand.
All right, on to the next one. This one is a great one, I think. Hiring managers, what is the biggest red flag on a resume?
So you're assuming the hiring manager is looking at the resume. First
Yes.
of all, you're assuming.
That's the assumption.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'll confess. This is still the confession show, I believe. So I'll
Yes.
confess. Rarely do I ever look at a resume. And usually before I speak to the candidate, I don't even look at their LinkedIn profile. Do you think that's weird?
I think it's a little bit strange. I guess my follow-up to that is, how do you know what questions to ask about their experience if you don't know specifically what roles they have or where they were previously?
Well, a few things. One, this is where the recruiter is so powerful. The recruiters I've worked with in my past are really, really good about getting the right candidates to me to look at and to talk to. I trust them. In fact, I tell the recruiters I work with, if you think the candidate's right, just schedule time with me. Just schedule time with me. I don't need to look at the resume, look at their profile, give you the approval to schedule. I don't need that. Just schedule with me and we go from there. So that's one thing. And second, I don't want to have a bias before I ever speak to the candidate. If I know nothing about them and I say hello to them, what I usually tell them is, don't assume anything in this interview. Don't assume I looked at your resume or your LinkedIn profile, because likely I have not. I want to treat this conversation like I ran into you waiting in line at the subway, waiting in line, at anywhere on the street, at the convenience store line. That's how I want the conversation to start and to get to know someone, because that's what I'm really trying to do in my interview, is get to know them. And I want them to get to know me and the company.
That's fair. That's a good answer. Tom Tate chimes in the comments section. I think everyone needs to master the one-page resume. And the answer to that is, don't use really small font. That's not the way to do it. He says 2 pages is pushing it. 3+ pages is way too much. Red flag if you are overselling yourself on the resume and telling me that you were a camp counselor back in '96. Sounds like that is a personal vendetta from Tom, but we will move on. And hiring manager, I really appreciate that aspect of you taking an open mind and removing bias from that and really having a genuine first conversation rather than kind of making an assessment on somebody before them just based on a profile or a piece of paper. Let's move on to the next one here. Does marking no for may we contact this employer raise any red flags or torpedo anyone's chances, maybe when filling out an application?
This is where I'm not sure I'm the really qualified hiring manager to answer this question, because I'm interviewing knowledge workers and not frontline workers, or I'm not interviewing in a company that requires previous employer contact. For me as a hiring manager, I wouldn't ask for it. I wouldn't need to talk to other employers. So that's not really for me. Maybe the HR team operates differently. Maybe they have these requirements, but for a hiring manager, that's not something I'm concerned with. And I'll tell you another scenario that I'm really not concerned with. If the candidate comes to me from an internal referral, from someone who's already working at the company and they're vouching for this person or suggesting them, that's even less I have to be concerned about personally. This is my personal experience.
That's fair. I appreciate that. And I think referrals is certainly a way. I know that they're proven to stay at organizations longer and actually grow with organizations longer as well. So that's a great way around it. And I think I agree with you. This may fall more on the human resources side. But either way, you never know what somebody is marking no for. So I don't think it should torpedo anyone's chances. This one I think is very relevant based on the past year. And it is forcing candidates to stand up during video interviews. Is this appropriate or is it not appropriate? So hiring manager, let's pretend this is an interview and I say, all right, now stand up just so that I can make sure you're not wearing pajama pants. Is that appropriate or not? What do you think in today's day and age?
I think I would be embarrassed to ask somebody to stand up. I think I'd be embarrassed as a hiring manager to say that or to do that. I think in the industries I work in, I don't see how this is relevant at all. And maybe it could be relevant somewhere. I'm not a master HR person to really understand and dissect this question, but I would tell you as a hiring manager for knowledge workers, I would never ask this question. I'd be embarrassed by it. And it's a shame, this candidate seemed to have gone through that.
I agree. I think that this brings bias into a situation. And in addition to that, I think it also opens up for potential litigation. You never know if someone's overcoming a disability or something along those lines. So I would 100% say that this is probably inappropriate for your organization. Next one is, this candidate interviewed for a month, completed an 8-hour timed assessment, then told them the search was suspended. I know you shared a story a little bit earlier, but how potentially does this happen? Why is it so frequently an issue that candidates have and post on the internet?
A lot of things happen. I can't speak for all companies out there, but sometimes I remember we were looking for about a year ago a presentation designer. We were looking for a presentation designer. We interviewed for a few months, and you know what? The pandemic hit, and we froze for a period hiring. Now, some people could say, well, that's obvious. Many companies in that situation froze, but things like this happen all the time. It's just not as obvious in the world that it impacts, the entire world. So in this case, things happen that you get interviewed for, and then the search or the process is suspended. I think we can't avoid that. We can't avoid things happening. What we can avoid and do better at as hiring managers and from recruiters and HR teams is explaining and sharing as quickly as we can why something is taking so long, why a role is no longer available, where you stood in that process. Because sometimes the worst part, that candidate was never really considered. Other times, there was a top candidate who expected the offer and didn't get it. So there's extremes to this too. We can do a better job here.
I think my follow-up question to that is, when explaining some of those reasons, whether it be suspended or whether another candidate came through and this individual is a silver medalist, is that a conversation that should be had via email or potentially on the phone? How does that work?
What's the question again?
The question is, if a candidate is potentially let off the hook or a search is suspended, when you're reaching out to them to let them know, is that a conversation that should be had via email or via phone call?
Okay. This is a tough one. I think if there was, how many candidates were there? Is it easy to do via phone call? Is it easier to do via email? Does a candidate even want to take a phone call from you? Should it be a text message? How do you really want to break up with your girlfriend? Right? And was it a relationship that was 2 weeks? Or was it something that happened over a 4-year period that would be very, very inappropriate to do over the phone? Right? Like, you should do that one in person. So I think I don't have a good answer to this question. Regardless of how it's done, it should be done in a very human approach. And it should take the candidate into consideration in their emotions, their time spent, all of that.
All right. Awesome. On to the next one here. And that is, some of our department managers feel that if a candidate won't tell us which other firms they are interviewing with, that is disqualifying. What are your feelings on asking where an individual is also interviewing?
So in this case, I personally ask candidates how their search is going. I literally say, hey, are you started your search? Have you been doing this for months? What has your experience been like? What are you finding? I don't care about I don't care about qualifying or disqualifying them based upon their answer. I actually am asking the questions because I'm genuinely interested in what they're hearing, feeling, seeing, what they've learned. As candidates interview, they learn. As hiring managers interview, we learn. And I can better help a candidate if I can get them to open up a little bit and share with me what they've been experiencing. So that answer doesn't have much to do with the question as it's phrased here related to qualifying or disqualifying. It's irrelevant to me. They can share or not share. But when they open up a little bit, it really helps me have a better conversation with them.
I think that also ties into the fact that you're not going into the interview with any bias by looking at a resume, by looking at potentially a LinkedIn profile, right? You don't know where they're coming from, and that may not be necessarily relevant. It's about where they're going in their journey, and asking that question should never disqualify or qualify an individual, but just provide some insight and some context as to who that person is as a whole. This one is, I think, a little interesting, right? This person has never been so heartbroken and frustrated. They think that the work experience, such as 2 or 3 years preferred, sometimes does not make sense. I'll ask you, do you think work experience makes sense in every scenario, and is it important?
In every scenario, no, not in every scenario. I will tell you though, sometimes as hiring managers, we are looking for someone who we feel, based upon what the role will require, you need certain amount of maturity in a space. So you need a certain amount of maturity in the marketing field of marketing. And I think that's where your experience does help. But even I don't have strict requirements on experience. And I've already written job descriptions that we talked about that. I don't like writing them. I've written job descriptions that say, hey, if you don't have the year's experience, but you have the equivalent experience of the technology, of the project work, of what we're trying to accomplish to meet our goal, if you have that experience, please apply. Because it does not always come down to, I check the box, I've done this for 2 years. No. What one person can get exposure to, so in marketing, what one person can get exposure to in an agency could be one person's 2-3 years working for a single company. So how can it be 2 or 3 years, right? So sometimes experience does in fact matter depending on the types of people we're looking for. Other times it's not relevant.
I think that makes complete sense. Everyone's referred to this past year as it feeling like 10 years. And that's because we've been integrated with Zoom so much and doing so many different things. That accumulates over time, and someone's experience is also different than someone else's if they're using a certain technology on a daily basis as opposed to just once in a while. So awesome. I appreciate that insight. This, I think, was pretty funny, and it's an example of an advertisement. Looking for a caterpillar, must have 5 years experience as a butterfly and at least a master's degree. This will also be an unpaid position. Do you feel that this is the way job ads look like nowadays?
I'll tell you what, when you look at Reddit and you look at Quora and you look at online postings from social media accounts, this certainly feels representative of what many candidates feel out there. This is hilarious.
Awesome. All right. And that does it for those wrapping up. Hiring manager. Still don't know who you are. Thank you for joining us today. I have one final question / thought for you. Over the years, you mentioned you've been in the hiring process for 20 plus years. What have you learned and what do you wish you knew earlier that you now know now?
This is a pretty good question, right? What do I wish I would have known? I think when you read books and you educate yourself and you talk to others around what interview should be and what the interview could be. And I wish I would have known earlier what an interview could be, because I spent a lot of my hiring and a lot of my time hiring the way I was told it should be. Rating systems and different ways to ask questions. And you know what I found after working through those? I found having the most genuine conversation I can possibly have with a candidate has produced the best results for me as a hiring manager. And I think that's really, really hard to get from a book or to get from someone else who's giving your advice about how to properly interview.
I think that's a super thoughtful and insightful answer. I appreciate that. I think, you can't necessarily be taught how to do a lot of things. You just have to get your hands dirty and do it and learn yourself, right? You need some building blocks, but you learn over the years. Mr. Hiring Manager, I appreciate you and your time today, as well as the decorations. Still don't know where you're from, what your name is, or who you are, or if you're going to rob a bank after this. But thank you for your time, and hopefully we can have you on again, maybe with a little bit less of a disguise. All right, we'll see you. Well, there you have it. That was Hiring Manager Confessions. Still don't know who that was. The jury's out. If you have any idea, fire it off into the chat, and we can always guess. But before we go, don't forget to like and subscribe We're putting out great content on a weekly basis. Specifically on this show, it's live every Thursday at noon Eastern time, but also follow Phenom. We post things daily. I want to shout out the Kuehne-Nagel case study that we just shared out. Definitely download that. And also wanted to give you a quick little recap on last week where we chatted around AI. I know it is a hot topic within HR. So last week's episode was all around AI for recruiting 101. When it comes to AI, we hear a lot of questions from TA teams all over the world. What are the benefits of AI recruiting and how should we use it in our day-to-day? And also, what are the best tools available? So here is a clip of a colleague of mine, Kumar, chatting a little bit about AI in recruiting.
If you think of the current scenario today, there's so much more emphasis on retaining talent and helping grow employees to their fullest potential. Like Ilya mentioned, recommendation systems are being used to recommend jobs to employees, but the systems have gotten a little bit more sophisticated now. It's not just about looking at who the employee is from a profile perspective and recommending jobs. It's gone a little bit further, looking at data points like performance, looking at data points like industry average tenures, readiness to move, and other external characteristics that can be a part of this recommendation story. If you look at other topics for talent management, learning is huge. We want every employee to upskill themselves and look at achieving greater heights. How do you use AI to show a learning path for people who want to grow and learn? Or it could just be beyond learning, maybe recommending a gig to an employee to pick up some skills here or there, or even recommending a mentor to connect to help address certain skill gaps. Most employees leave the company because they don't see a path forward, and using AI, using the analysis of data and identifying patterns of past career paths that have happened within the enterprise and showcasing that to employees is a huge advantage and a leg up for enterprises today.
Definitely check out that full episode if you want to know anything more about AI. If you have any questions for Kumar, Ilya, or our hiring manager, our DMs are open, or you can always email us at txl@phenompeople.com. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I did see Jer chimed in with a couple chats there. You were in the right chat. Joseph, thank you for chiming in. Tom as well. Jen, LinkedIn user, Sai, Carrie, Dan. It is always a pleasure to hear you and what you have to say in the comment section. So thank you so much for that. Definitely like and subscribe, and we will see you next week, noon Eastern time here on TXL. Thanks.